Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about David Ireland's play, Not Neutral. I think this is an absolutely brilliant play. It is a very short play. It's got supposedly about a 50-minute runtime, 47 pages in this Methuen drama edition. That's about half or less than half of the length of many full-length plays. But I quite like that. I like shorter plays. I think that's a good thing. So props to David Ireland. I don't know if the rest of his plays are fairly short or if they are normal sort of full-length 2.5 hour runtime feels. I'm going to read more David Ireland plays because my friend Mike Grundman, who's our field director for EF Tours for my Literary London program, he saw that I had picked up some David Ireland plays in the National Theatre bookstore. By the way, if you ever get the chance to go to London, go to the National Theatre. If you are a drama person, a theatre person, go to the National Theatre bookshop. It is... it's absolutely amazing. I bought this play there. I had to restrain myself. This is not a video about the National Theatre Bookstore, #not sponsored. But hey, National Theatre Bookstore, if you want to sponsor my channel, I'll accept free books in lieu of cash. Anyway, they're not going to sponsor me because nobody gives a shit about my channel. So this is a play that is really, really, really interested in Northern Irish identity. David Ireland himself is from Belfast, and the Protestant part of Belfast. He was raised Protestant, I believe, and the sort of central question, in a way, becomes: who are the Northern Irish? Are they Irish? Are they British? And what does it mean one way or another? That what does it mean is not a simple question. It is, what does it mean to different groups? So the play itself revolves around, we have Matthew, who's a young aspiring actor on whom we open. He is practicing Richard III's famous opening monologue. Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by this sun of York, and all the clouds that lowered upon our house, in the deep bosom of the ocean buried. Now are our brows bound with victorious wreaths, our bruised arms hung up for monuments, our stern alarums changed to merry meetings, our dreadful marches to delightful measures. Grim-visaged war hath smoothed his wrinkled front, and now, instead of mounting barbed steeds... And that's where he's cut off by the entrance, or more accurately, by him noticing the presence of his uncle Ray, who is a painter, not an artist, but like a house painter, I assume. And they have this sort of lengthy discussion because Matthew is supposed to go to London to audition for this role. It seems like he's trying to get into RADA, which is the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, or he is a RADA student who's auditioning for a part. It wasn't 100% clear to me, but I don't think it really matters for the purposes of this. What matters is that he's leaving East Belfast and he's going to London to try and become an actor. And one of the debates that Matthew and Ray have is how he should talk about himself when he's in London. Ray says that he should present himself as Irish, and Matthew insists upon being British. And the argument from Ray, essentially, let's see if we can find a good... the argument from Ray, essentially, is that... Okay. So he says here, even if you don't think you're Irish, you should tell people in London you're Irish. Matthew says, why? Ray says, they fucking love it over there, especially the women. And you want an English girlfriend, trust me. English women are fucking filthy, I know. Get yourself a lovely wee English girl, get married, and get yourself a wee house somewhere like Middlesex. And you never need to set foot in this fucking shithole of a country ever again. But he goes on, there's another bit. I'm trying to remember where exactly it is. Trying to find it. Oh yeah, here it is. So he has this other major argument that he makes. He says here, Matthew, I don't give a fuck who's Irish and who's not. I'm just thinking about what's best for your career. And that's how themins in London will see you. Calling yourself British just embarrasses them. It makes them think of the empire and slavery and all that. And the type of people you're meeting, fucking lovies, isn't that what they're called? They hate all that. It makes them uncomfortable. And, I mean, yeah, Northern Ireland is a strange thing for the British, right? Because it is, in many ways, sort of the last outpost of the British Empire. It is clear, and I think it may in some ways be less so today than it was, for instance, during the period of the Troubles, but it still remains that Northern Ireland is an area that is always potentially opposed to ongoing British rule, right? There's now a Catholic majority, and there seems to be a movement towards an independence vote in the way that there was in Scotland in 2014, which came very, very close to, and the Scots came very, very close to winning that referendum for independence. There are some who believe that Northern Ireland would have a successful independence referendum. Whether or not that's true, I don't know enough to have an informed opinion. But I mean, many British people alive today remember when the British Army was dispatched to places like Belfast and Derry because the country literally needed to be occupied by its own military. And I mean, obviously there are some people out there, regressives, whoever it is, who are like, rah, rah, we should rebuild the British Empire and all this bullshit. But I think the vast majority of British people on the island of Britain itself, as opposed to Northern Ireland, which has slightly different, more complex politics about this, I think the majority of British people are not that keen on imperialism anymore. Like, if given the option to go and recolonize things, I think most British people would say, no, thank you. I'm good. So we've got that sort of element of colonial guilt or post-colonial guilt, post-imperial guilt on the part of the British, and these sort of uncomfortable elements of Northern Ireland as a continually colonially occupied space, Northern Ireland as a space that reflects ongoing tensions about British imperialism and the British imperial use of violence in colonies, etc., etc. So Ray is saying, whatever you think about yourself, however you view yourself, if you want them to take you into this school, if you want them to cast you in parts, make them comfortable. And Matthew asserts his Britishness, and he even sort of asserts an almost. And this may be just my sort of personal view of it, but this sort of ugly Orangeman type mentality, right? So the Orangemen were the and I think still are, this sort of society of very dedicated Protestant Unionists. They are stridently anti-Catholic, anti-Republic of Ireland. They're stridently pro-British, and they celebrate the conquest of Ulster by William of Orange, hence the term Orangeman. And Matthew presents this, again, very quasi-militant perspective on his British identity, essentially saying this is a core element of who our family is and what our family's history is. They had an ancestor who fought with the Ulster contingent at the Battle of the Somme, one of the famous engagements in which Ulster troops were involved in World War I, and took quite heavy casualties. Like, they suffered significantly for the British Empire. And Matthew reveals that his mother has told him that his father was in the UVF, the Ulster Volunteer Forces, I believe is what the acronym is for. A paramilitary group that during the Troubles regularly committed political violence against people they believed to be in the IRA and other Republican or Catholic paramilitaries, who regularly used terrorism, who regularly engaged in anti-Catholic activism, etc., etc. And so he has this sort of strong sense that this is an important thing. And yet, the other interesting element is the role of Richard III here, because what it says at the very beginning, Matthew approaches the audience. He is about to perform the opening soliloquy from Shakespeare's Richard III. He speaks the speech with a very affected English accent. He has trouble with the word now. And when Ray convinces Matthew to perform this monologue for him, what he says here is, so Matthew says, "Why the fuck did you stop me?" Ray says, "I was just surprised." Matthew says, "Why?" Ray says, "Well, you're doing it like English." Matthew says, "How should I do it?" Ray says, should you not use your own accent?" Matthew says, "He's the Duke of Gloucester. He's hardly going to talk like he's from the bottom of the Newtownards Road." And so this is a very striking thing, right? Because Matthew insists on his British identity, but a British identity is not an undifferentiated identity, right? Ask a Scot whether they're the same as the English. Ask a Welsh person whether they're the same as the English. Ask the English whether they're the same as the Welsh and the Scots. And the same goes for Northern Ireland, right? Like, Northern Ireland is clearly not the same thing as England. Even England is not the same thing as England. Scotland is not the same thing as Scotland. Wales might be slightly more homogenous, but like, even in a smaller portion of the British of Britain, like Wales, you have very different environments, right? the sort of northern part of Wales is very mountainous and much more sort of rural and working class, whereas areas like Cardiff and to a lesser extent Swansea are cities. Right? Cardiff is a city and it has an urban life. London is very different from Cornwall, for instance. Right? And I mean, there's small cities and things in Cornwall, but we have these sort of differentiated things. And so, being from Belfast, he is not from Gloucester. His culture is not Gloucester culture, and he is not English. And so, it's an interesting thing that when it comes that as an actor, Matthew is incredibly reluctant to play a part. In this case, the part being the Irishman. Oh, sure, my good Paddy. We've been suffering under the British Empire for centuries, don't you know? This sort of, I don't know if the Irish say, don't you know? I was a little more Minnesota there at the end. Anyway, but you get what I'm saying, right? This sort of, Ray says, this is the thing that will help your career. They prefer Irish people who are not Protestant, who are not unionist, who are not associated with the UVF or these other paramilitary groups, because that makes English people more comfortable. And so you go to England, play that part. And Matthew refuses, but he is very happy. He even insists on playing Richard III without his own identity. And strangely enough, by the end of the play, Ray has actually talked him into doing Richard III with his own East Belfast accent. And so at the end of the play, we get Matthew, again, repeating these lines from the opening of Richard III in his own accent. And it's not 100% clear what these sort of competing elements of identity, what these competing shifts mean necessarily in terms of what, if any, conclusion Ireland comes to about the nature of Northern Irish identity.